What's up, everyone? Today I'm bringing a deck profile on my Ogdoadic. Now, technically this is probably more like an Ogdoadic Time Thief Therion deck, because I do play Time Thieves and Therions in this. Granted, the Therion engine is very small, but this deck can actually do some pretty cool stuff, and it's not as horrible as a deck as a lot of people like to say it is. But without further ado, let's get right into it. First, I run the 3 Nuno. Nuno, you can send itself from your hand to the graveyard to send one dark reptile from your deck to the graveyard. And if you control one monsters or you control a Ogdoadic monster, you can special summon this card from your graveyard, but banish it when it leaves the field. Now, when you do this, you cannot special summon monsters except reptiles, while this card is face up in the monster zone, which really isn't too much of a downside because Nuno is the only card that restricts it to reptiles. So you can use the others to go into whatever non-reptile monster you want. And Nuno is essentially your starter because you can just use it to send Karis, Aliert, or not the Karis, but like Aliert, Zoa, Queen even. Then we also got 3 of the Nayu. Nayu is like the dark version of Nuno. Whereas when you send Nuno to the graveyard, or when you discard Nuno to the graveyard to foolish a light reptile, or dark reptile, Nayu can send itself to the graveyard to foolish a light reptile. And when Nayu is normal or special summoned, you can add one Ogdoadic spell trap from your deck to your hand, which is definitely really good because the spells and traps for this deck are, well, not really the traps, but the spells for this deck are actually pretty good. Now the rest of the Ogdoadic monsters, we run at 1 because you don't really want to open multiple copies in your hand. I run the 1 Karis. Karis is very important because while it's in the graveyard, you can tribute one monster, special summon this card from your graveyard, then your opponent can special summon one monster from their graveyard, then it gets effects. Now if you're going first, this effect doesn't matter, which is kind of how it is with most of the Ogdoadics. But Karis, when it is special summoned, you can special summon a level 4 or lower Ogdoadic monster from your graveyard, which is definitely pretty cool, so you can use it to summon the Nayu, which will trigger the Nayu's effect. Also on 1, Zoa. Zoa is pretty cool. If this card is sent from the field to the graveyard or special summoned from the graveyard, your opponent draws 1 card, and if they do, you can add 1 Ogdoadic monster from your deck to your hand. Then each player sends 1 card from their hand to the graveyard. Now, against some decks, this can help them, like if you're going against Tier Elements or Shaddolls. Well, not really Shaddolls, but something like Tier, for example. But I'd say in this format, it's definitely pretty safe to use. Well, yes, it does give them a draw, but you can get so much with Zoa. I run the 1 Aliert. Aliert is probably the weaker of the Ogdoadic monsters, because honestly, I rarely ever send Aliert to the graveyard. I only really summon it because it's a Ogdoadic name, and you want to get multiple Ogdoadic monsters in your graveyard with different names, because that just powers up your Water Lily. Now I run 1 Amunisa, aka the Queen, and look at that collector rare. Honestly, the collector rares for the Ogdoadics are pretty cheap. Overlord is the most expensive at 25. And I thought it'd be nice, have a collector rare for the deck profile. Focus. Now, Amunisa, when it's in the graveyard, you contribute 2 monsters to special summon it. And if a monster is special summoned from your opponent's graveyard, you send 1 card they control to the graveyard. If a monster is sent from your opponent's hand or deck to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 light or dark reptile monster from your graveyard. So Amunisa is pretty good. So if they were to foolish, you can just special summon the Overlord from the graveyard if you have that in the graveyard, or you can summon the Nayu. Really depends on the game state. Also on 1. Ogdoadic, whoops, also in collector rare. I really hope these get rarity upgrades, because like the highest rarity of the Ogdoadic outside of collectors is Ultra. I feel like they look really nice in secret, but that's just me. Now Overlord requires 3 monsters to special summon from the graveyard, and depending on the scenario, I actually prefer Amunisa over Overlord, because Overlords can be nice, but there are certain times where I may not necessarily need the Overlord. Overlord, essentially, you can nuke the field, send all monsters to the graveyard, except 1 special summon from the graveyard, so mostly your Ogdoadic monsters will be fine, because most of the time you are special summoning from the graveyard. Now, I did say I was running Time Thieves in this. I'm running 3 Regulator, the 1 Winder, 1 Adjuster, and 1 Bezel Ship. Now, Regulator is the one you want to see most, because you contribute this card to special summon 2 Time Thieves from your deck, and that's definitely really good. So ideally you open this, you tribute it to special summon the Winder and the Adjuster. And Adjuster, when it is special summon, you can full-list a time thief to the graveyard, which you will full-list the Bezel Ship. Now, Bezel Ship is actually pretty important for the strategy. Granted, there are other ways you can do it, but Bezel Ships makes it the most effective. It's the best thing at getting your Therion engine live. Not because when Bezel Ship's in the graveyard, target XYZ monster control, detach the material from it, then special the Bezel Ship from grave. So if we go into the Spriggan's Merrymaker and then into the Sargus, we can use the effect of Bezel Ship, detach material from Sargus, because Sargus does not detach materials for cost. Summon the Bezel Ship, and then boom, you can make the Therion. Speaking of Therions, I run one Therion King Regulus. Fortunately, I could not really find a Regulus at my locals, and I don't really want to buy Therion so much because most likely getting reprinted in the Megatons. So if I buy it, it's just going to go down in price. Hopefully it does get reprinted because I'd really like to play with this card much more. Now for hand traps, I guess I'm running the meta standard, 3 Ash and 3 Nib. Moving on to the spells, I run 3 Ogdoadic Water Lily. Water Lily allows you to send 1 reptile monster from your deck to the graveyard. Then if you have 5 or more reptile monsters with different names in your graveyard, you can special summon 1 reptile monster from your graveyard. So that's why you want to have multiple Ogdoadic monsters with different names in your graveyard, so you can get the full effect of Water Lily, because that monster reborn can actually ended up being pretty good. Also running 1 Serpent Strike, which is kind of monster reborn. Send 1 monster from hand or field to the graveyard. Then you can target a reptile monster in your graveyard with a different attribute than that monster. Special summon it. Of course, you run the 3 Snake Rain. Essentially, this plus Water Lily is a really good setup because with Snake Rain, you can discard a card to send 4 reptiles. Basically, if you have an Ogdoadic monster in hand, you can send that one as the cost for the Snake Rain, then send 4 more off of Snake Rain's effect, which basically gives you full access to the Water Lily's effect. Also run 1 Smart World. Pretty easy because you know just swap out Ogdoadics. You can also use Ash as well because both Nayu and Remnant have 0 attack. Also run the 1 Therion Disc Coliseum to search out the Therion King Regulus, which is if we have this, then we don't really have to go into the Sargus, which means we can use those materials for other stuff. 1 Call by the Grave because you don't want to get hand trapped. And as far as traps, 3 Imperm. Moving on to the extra deck. I run 1 King of Feral Imps. I think there are like some builds that are running like 2 King of the Feral Imps, but I really only use 1. While yes, it's not a hard once per turn, you really don't need it more than once. Basically, detach from extra material from this card, add a reptile monster from your deck to your hand. I run the 1 Merrymaker and the 1 Sargus. Sargus can summon itself on top of the Merrymaker, and when Sargus can search your Therion King Regulus. Also run 1 Dugaris. Having that extra draw power is really nice. Although Power Prosperity is also an option in this deck. Also run the 1 Exciton Knight, 1 Bagusa, other pretty generic level rank 4s. I run 1 Hope Harbinger because you can actually make rank 8s pretty easily in this, but most oftentimes you're not really going to go into this. Also run the 1 Utopic Future and Draco Future. It's pretty often that I end on a board of, let's say, Sargus and, let's say, maybe King of the Swamp. Or not King of the Swamp, King of the Feral Imps. Since they're not really going to do anything on my opponent's turn, I can just use both those to go into the Draco Future. Or Zeus if I'm going second. Also run 1 Dark, 1 IP Masquerena, a Nightmare Unicorn, an Access Code, and an Apollosa. And that's it for my extra deck. So what do you think of Ogdoadics? Think it's a pretty solid deck? I'd say it's pretty decent. I wouldn't say it's like top tier or anything, but not a horrible deck by any means.